The fall of Rome. It's one of the biggest, most epic stories in all of history, right? This colossal empire that just crumbled into dust. But how does a superpower that ruled for centuries actually end? Well, the real story is so much more complex, and honestly, way more fascinating than you might think.
We've all heard the date, 476 AD. That's the year the Germanic chieftain Odoacer kicked out the last Western Roman emperor, a kid named Romulus Augustulus, and basically mailed the keys to the kingdom back to Constantinople. The end. Clean and simple. Yeah, but history is never that neat, is it? Was it really just one bad day? Or was 476 AD just the final faint heartbeat after a really, really long illness? You see, the fall wasn't a moment in time. It was a process, this slow-motion collapse that has kept historians arguing for centuries. Just how much have they argued? Well, get this. Back in 1984, one historian, Alexander Demant, actually cataloged over 210 different theories explaining why Rome fell. 210! Everything from lead poisoning in the water pipes to moral decay. This tells you right away this wasn't some simple collapse. It was a total systems failure on a civilization-wide scale. Okay, so to really understand what was lost, we've got to first appreciate what Rome was at its absolute peak. Let's talk about the era of the Roman peace. For more than 2 centuries, from about 27 BC to 180 AD, the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, was a real thing. For the first time ever, this huge, diverse chunk of the world was united under a system where, for most people, the benefits of government, like security, laws, roads, were way bigger than the costs. It was a genuine golden age of stability. And at the heart of all this prosperity, good, stable money. A coin like this one, a denarius, was made of nearly pure silver. It was a reliable currency that you could trust, and it fueled this incredible trade network that stretched all the way from Britain to Egypt. This financial stability, plus relatively low taxes, meant they could invest in the kind of massive infrastructure we still talk about today. So the secret sauce for all this success was built on a few key ingredients. Your property was safe. The law was, for the most part, predictable. Local governments were actually pretty responsive to what people needed. And all of this created the perfect environment for farming to boom, trade to flourish, and cities to grow into these amazing hubs of culture and business. So what went wrong? How did this golden age start to tarnish? Well, the first major shocks to this incredibly stable system didn't come from invading armies or corrupt politicians. They came from the planet itself. You see, as historian Kyle Harper argues, Rome got lucky. Its rise happened during something called the Roman climatic optimum, basically a long stretch of unusually stable, warm, and wet weather that was perfect for growing food. But around 150 AD, that luck started to run out. The climate got more unpredictable, just as new, terrifying diseases started to rip through the empire. First, the Antonine Plague, which was probably smallpox, killed millions. Then, a century later, the plague of Cyprian hit. The empire's 2 most basic foundations, food and people, were suddenly shaking. But here's the thing, climate change and plagues didn't destroy Rome all by themselves, no. Instead, they were like the first push on a very, very long line of dominoes. They set off this catastrophic chain reaction that would eventually bring the whole western half of the empire crashing down. What happened next was a perfect storm, where each new crisis didn't just add to the pile of problems, it actually multiplied them. It created this vicious cycle of collapse that just kept feeding itself. The first huge domino to fall was military. As historian Peter Heather explains, the arrival of the Huns from Central Asia created a massive refugee crisis on Rome's borders. They pushed huge groups of people, like the Goths, right into Roman territory. And after the Romans suffered a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Adrianople in 378, the floodgates just burst open. Over the next few decades, the empire lost control of Spain, Gaul, and, this is the real killer, North Africa, which was basically the breadbasket of the Western Empire. And losing all that land had an immediate, devastating effect on the empire's bank account. As the empire shrank, so did its tax base. Losing those rich provinces, especially North Africa, meant a catastrophic drop in the money coming in, the very money they needed to pay the army to defend what was left. Peter Heather puts it perfectly right here. The money from taxes was the lifeblood of the state, and as that lifeblood drained away, the empire's ability to fight back just withered. It was a death spiral. Losing territory made the military weaker, which of course led to losing even more territory. So, with the tax money drying up, how did the emperors pay their bills? Simple.
They cheated. They started debasing the currency, which is just a fancy way of saying they started making junk coins. On the left, you see that beautiful, solid silver denarius from the good old days. On the right, a coin from about a century later. It looks silver, but it's mostly cheap bronze with a super thin silver wash. This is the ancient version of printing money, and it led to insane, runaway inflation.
The government's response to this was, well, a total disaster. In 301 AD, the Emperor Diocletian issued his famous edict on maximum prices. He literally tried to fix the price of over 1,000 different things. And the result? Exactly what you'd expect. Producers couldn't make a profit, so they just stopped making stuff. This created massive shortages and crippled the economy even more. And all of this brings us to the final, biggest domino, the complete and utter breakdown of the political system. All this military and economic chaos fueled endless civil wars. The government, desperate for cash, became a predator, seizing property and hitting people with crushing taxes. So what did the rich do? They basically checked out. They dodged their taxes, avoided military service, and just hoarded their wealth, leaving the state to completely fall apart. The trust was gone. The system was broken. So if you're asking, why did Rome fall, the most crucial takeaway is this. There is no single reason. It wasn't just one thing. It was a convergence of crises, a whole bunch of disasters all hitting at the same time.
Different historians tend to focus on different pieces of this giant, messy puzzle. You've got Edward Gibbon, who famously blamed internal problems like moral decay. Then you have Peter Heather, who points to the catastrophic shock of the invasions. And more recently, Kyle Harper has highlighted the critical role of environmental factors, like climate and disease.
And the reality is, they're all right. It wasn't one of these things. It was all of them, feeding off each other. The catastrophic external pressures that Heather describes hit an empire that was already seriously weakened from the inside by the environmental, economic, and political rot that other historians focus on. It was the perfect storm. Now, what's really fascinating is that the eastern half of the empire, which faced a lot of the same internal problems, actually survived. Why? Well, a big part of it was just geography. Its wealthiest provinces were better protected. The West faced a unique and relentless storm on its massive frontiers that it just couldn't handle anymore. So while the West really did experience a true collapse, the East managed to transform itself, surviving for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. The fall of Rome isn't just ancient history. It's a powerful reminder. It shows us that even the mightiest civilizations are incredibly complex systems, and they're vulnerable to a cascade of failures. And it leaves all of us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. If an empire that seemed eternal could crumble under the weight of so many crises hitting at once, what lessons should we be learning for our own time?